You keep the tension in the bow by not having sex, and you direct that upwards. The lack of sex keeps the mystery alive. You know what's cooler than sex? Philosophy. Socrates found literally the most annoying woman he could find to marry to test his own resolve. Wives are for kids, concubines are for service, prostitutes are for pleasure. Love is not about intimacy, it's not about union, it's about procreation. When you've met a true beauty, the air is knocked out of your lungs, right? Your jaw drops to the floor, you stutter, you don't know what to say, and the whole world kind of zeroes in. The small, flaccid penis is considered more desirable because it represents a moderate and a virtuous man, okay? Now, I don't usually like to brag. If you feel unfulfilled in your romantic life, whether it's because you're struggling to find someone, or maybe you're in a relationship but feel like there must be something more, then this is the book for you. Plato's Symposium is the greatest treatise on love in the Western canon, and it'll teach you not just what you're doing wrong, but give you an alternative path to satisfy your deepest erotic yearnings. I returned to the Symposium myself after meeting an amazing girl early this year in an intense romantic encounter. And if it weren't for this book, I don't think I would have even understood what I was going through and what was at stake. How and whom to love is one of the most consequential decisions you will ever make in your life. If you get this right, you could end up with an angel who elevates your life to a level you didn't think was possible. But if you get this wrong, you could waste the best years of your life suing your worst enemy over the custody of children who've come to hate you. Do not underestimate just how good and how bad love can make your life. But fortunately, Plato has given us a guide about how to get love right. When people try to diagnose what has gone wrong with modern dating, modern love, a common answer is that we care way too much about physical beauty, right? Whether it's plastic surgery, distorting standards, whether it's social media, right? Unrealistic expectations, body dysmorphia. The critique is, it's only because we care so much about beauty, because we're so beauty obsessed, that we care so much about sex and miss the deeper connections. Before I read the Symposium, and I thought who a true lover of beauty was, I thought about Tom in Tom and Jerry when he sees a pretty she-cat, okay? His pupils turn into little hearts, and then his eyes pop out of his sockets like little springs, boing! And for the entire episode, all he does is lust after the she-cat. That's who I thought a true lover of beauty was. Plato, of course, flips this narrative on its head, okay? The true lover of beauty will not react to his beloved with lust, but with awe. He's going to behave a lot less like horny old Tom, but exactly the opposite, like a reverent priest who has caught a glimpse of the divine. And so the fact that our first response to beauty is lust and not awe, the fact that we're so oversexed as a culture, actually means we're not valuing even physical beauty enough. Now, you might be surprised that a rational philosopher like Plato would elevate something so soft and squishy like love and beauty to such a high degree, but he does. Plato puts in the mouth of his Socrates, I quote, "The only subject I can claim to know about is love." Think about how extraordinary that is, right? This is the wisest man in all of Athens. The only thing he can claim to know about is love. And furthermore, even stronger, Plato, in a sense, elevates beauty itself above other manifestations of the good, such as justice, wisdom, self-control. If you know anything about Plato, you know how good justice, wisdom, and self-control are. So in what sense is beauty even better? Well, for starters, beauty is striking in a way those other things are not. And what Plato is getting at, perhaps it's an experience some of you have felt before, when you've met a true beauty, the air is knocked out of your lungs, right? Your jaw drops to the floor, you stutter, you don't know what to say, and the whole world kind of zeroes in. Just as everything that seemed so important to you just a second ago, your life, your career, your family, your bank account, fades into the distance. That's also what happens when you get punched, okay? That's why it's called falling in love, not strolling leisurely into love. You are stricken by love, and you fall. Justice is not like that, okay? Encountering a wise man will not knock the air out of your lungs. No one has been mesmerized by how self-controlled their dates were. Now, the reason that Plato thinks beauty is so striking is because beauty is visible. And Plato sees vision as our keenest faculty, what he calls the natural route to the soul. And so beauty is important, not because it's better to be beautiful than it is to be just, but because it's more available and accessible. Beauty is a channel through which everyone, and I mean everyone, young and the old, cynical and the motivated, the lettered and the uncultivated, can be captivated and led by. You need a lot of training to be attuned, to be impressed by wisdom in someone. But all of us come out of the womb attuned to the radiant glow of beauty. I think it's little wonder then that so many ancient civilizations have associated the brightest planet in the night sky with their divinity, representing beauty. The ancient Mesopotamians called it the star of Ishtar, Ishtar being the goddess of love and war. The Greeks associated with Aphrodite, which when Romanized is where we got our name for it, Venus, right? The goddess of love and beauty. Beauty, then, we may say, shines most brightly in the constellation of the good. But not only is beauty the most striking manifestation of the good, it's also the most prevalent and encompassing, because everything can be beautiful. A face can be beautiful, a body can be beautiful, a mathematical theorem can be beautiful, a lecture can be beautiful. Yet not everything can be just. Not everything can be self-controlled. It makes no sense, right, to talk about a just toaster or a self-controlled tree, but it does make sense to call them beautiful. And this is because Plato thinks, very simply, the world is mathematical in its nature. And so what makes something good, what makes something beautiful, is that it approximates the idealized ratios of a thing, okay? Here's an example. Obviously, Plato doesn't give this, but it might be helpful. Why is the golden ratio, right, 1 to 0.618, why is that so beautiful across domains? Architecture, art. Plato would say that it's not due to personal taste. It's not culturally relative. It's not even relative to human nature, but that there's something in divine nature, in objectivity itself, that makes the golden ratio, in some sense, the right ratio. And he's going to make the same claim about faces, about constitutions, about souls, about mathematical theorems, that all of them have an idealized ratio. And so what makes something beautiful is that it approximates a kind of divine objective perfection, which of course is what makes something good, right? And so, whereas justice, wisdom, self-control is a subset of the good, right? It's a kind of goodness. It's one specific type of idealized ratio. The beautiful is the good, and the good is the beautiful. They're the same set, right? And so it turns out that not only is beauty the most striking, it's also the most universal and the most encompassing. And Plato thinks that if we truly understood this aspect about beauty, how it's connected with this divine objectivity, this divine perfection, we wouldn't react to it in the way that horny old Tom does, but in the following way. So another dialogue I'll be bringing in called the Phaedrus, this is Plato's other dialogue on love. He tells a story about how a true lover reacts to his beloved. The true lover sees his beloved from afar, and at first, it's lust, okay, just like horny old Tom. His eyes are popping out of his sockets. But that lust motivates the lover to approach his beloved. And Plato says, when the lover gets close enough and he sees, in Plato's own words, the lightning beauty of the beloved's face, there's a second impulse, and that's awe. An awe at the perfect beauty of the face, at the idealized ratios manifested in the facial symmetry. And that awe is so strong that it eventually contains the lust. What Plato is getting at here is akin to how when we meet someone who's especially talented in one domain, let's say singing, that can reignite our faith not just in the human potential to sing, but the human potential itself, right? So seeing one small instantiation of the good reminds us of the whole. And so the lover, by seeing how this one feature, beauty, can be perfected in such a striking way in one human, is reminded how all of our faculties and all of our human virtues can also be perfected, one of which is self-control, which contains the lust, right? So the mechanism is that he holds himself higher after seeing the beauty of the beloved. So lust engenders awe. Awe rescues self-control. And that self-control, again, contains the lust. And so the experience of encountering a true beauty, then, we might analogize to walking into a beautiful cathedral. And for me, the most beautiful cathedral I've been to is the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. And I still remember being awestruck by the verticality of that structure. And when you walk in, you're flanked by these magnificent columns that are so tall, they seem to be holding up the heavens themselves, as every architectural line in the cathedral is directing your gaze upwards, right? And so it was evident from the architecture itself that the beauty of that cathedral was not self-contained. It was literally pointing at something higher. And Plato wants to say that the same can be said about a true lover encountering a true beauty, that they too would be inspired by that beauty to direct their gaze upwards and not just to have sex with it. Okay, some people are so beautiful that to have sex with them should feel like a violation of the sacred, okay? Like running a fish market in the Sagrada Familia. I quote to you Plato. For the corrupted lover, this is Plato, the sight of the beloved's beauty does not arouse reverence in him. No, he surrenders to pleasure and tries like an animal to mount his partner and to father offspring. And having become habituated to excess, he's not afraid or ashamed to pursue unnatural pleasures. But when the true lover sees a marvelous face or a bodily form, which is a good reflection of beauty, at first he shivers and is gripped by fear, and the sight moves him to revere his beloved as if a god. In fact, it is only concern about being thought completely insane that stops him from sacrificing to his beloved as to a cult statue or a god. The thing I want to emphasize for you, all of this is just physical beauty, okay? Which we're going to learn is the worst kind. It's not the worst, the lowest kind of, the weakest kind of beauty. But even the weakest kind of beauty, Plato thinks, has such inspirational strength that it can contain something as powerful as lust. And what's really interesting, what we should rescue here, is how Plato thinks that this lust is contained. Not by shunning beauty away, right? Not by distancing oneself from the beauty, not by a prudeness, right? Make room for Jesus. But the exact opposite, by approaching the beauty, even by possessing the beauty. And it's by seeing the beauty more closely and more clearly that that lust is contained, right? And so the provocative conclusion that I've drawn from Plato is this: our culture is so sex-crazed because it doesn't value even physical beauty enough. It is only because we have truncated beauty from its elevating potential that it now inspires lust and not awe. This book right here, the Symposium, is how we recover that elevating potential of beauty in our lives today. And that is what you're going to learn in this lecture. Okay, some context in the book. A symposium is an after-dinner drinking party by the aristocratic males at the time. You go to a private residence, you lounge back in these sofas, and you drink, maybe have a snack or two, and you talk poetry, you talk philosophy, dialectic, and you're entertained, right? By entertainers who double as prostitutes. And so much like love, these symposia had a dual potential to them. Because on one hand, it could just be an orgy. It could just degenerate into hedonism. But on the other hand, symposia acted as this important pedagogical institution, especially for the young men at the time. Because it was not only a place where you could talk and learn about philosophy and poetry, it's precisely because of those temptations that it acts as a limited testing ground to test how well in control you are of your appetites. So this particular symposium that we're going to talk about today begins quite sober. It begins quite sober, that's the key word. Because the symposius had a big night the night before, huge celebration, everyone's hungover. So they shoo away the flute girl, entertainer, prostitute, and they say, let's talk philosophy, okay? Let's go around and each of us give a speech in praise of love. Okay, so that's all that this book is. 7 consecutive speeches on love, and we're going to examine 3 of the most important ones. The first one we're going to examine is going to be by Aristophanes, which gives a surprisingly modern account of love. The second one we're going to examine is going to be by Socrates. Okay, this is the core of the piece. It's going to critique our modern conception of love and give us an alternative. And the final one is going to be from the legendary playboy, celebrity, aristocrat, Alcibiades, who will show you what happens when love goes wrong. Okay, so let's begin with Aristophanes. So Aristophanes is a comic playwright. So he writes fictions which are comedic. And that shows in the speech which he gives. Because unlike the previous speeches, we're skipping the first 3, Aristophanes' speech is not a rational treatise on love. It's a myth. Okay? It's quite a funny myth at that. It's a myth about not just how love came to be, but how humanity itself came to be. And despite it being over 2,000 years old at this point, I think you'll recognize it as distinctively modern. And what I mean by that is that the same philosophy of love underneath a Moulin Rouge, a Romeo and Juliet, and a Titanic, you're going to find in the myth of Aristophanes, and it begins as such. Once upon a time, every member of the human race had 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 genitals, 2 faces, perched on a perfectly spherical body. Okay. So the way that this worked was you were joined to someone in the front. Okay. Your face and your genitals were sticking to the back, and your back was hunched over with the other person in a way that it formed a perfect sphere. And we can still walk and do things, but we have a special power. Aristophanes says when we want to go really fast, we stick out our limbs and we cartwheel around. All right, I'm glad that landed. He'll be very happy. So on one hand, this is just supposed to be funny. But the choice of genre here is not an accident, because there's something inherently comedic about love itself. Love is comedic because it makes us all a bit mad, right? We start fretting over the smallest details. Should I use a semicolon or a colon or a period in this text? We start overanalyzing the most innocuous signs like a crazed prophet. Right? I sent her 5 lines of text. She only sent me back 4. What does this mean? And we start doing all kinds of crazy shit that would be completely inexcusable if not for the fact that we are in love, right? But just because love makes us mad, Plato reminds us, it doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. There's clearly bad madness, human madness, but there's also a kind of good madness, which Plato calls divine madness, okay? Prophets are mad. The poets were mad. Great artists are not normal people. And Plato is going to put love as well in this category of divine madness, meaning that it has an elevating potential if you know how to follow it right. Comedy, then, becomes a very fitting genre for love because it is able to capture this hysterical, maddening, irrational quality of love, but without critiquing it and instead painting it as charming, right? This is why I think rom-coms are so popular nowadays. So beneath this comedic shell, there's already a very serious message relayed to us in this first image of Spherical Man, which is that love only exists with lack, okay? Spherical Man, with the sphere, the spherical body represented, Plato thought the circle was a perfect shape, was perfection, divinity, it was self-sufficiency. Spherical Man was already whole, he had no lack, and therefore he had no love. Even reproduction, we did it by ourselves in the ground, like cicadas. Okay, that's how self-sufficient we were. All right, so how did we get to our current, sorry state with only 2 arms and 2 legs? Well, it turns out that Spherical Man was not just, perfect aesthetically and self-sufficient, but he was extremely powerful and thus extremely ambitious. And so we mounted an assault on Mount Olympus itself in an attempt to displace the gods. We failed, and the gods wanted to punish us. The gods can't kill off the human race because the Greek gods are dependent on human worship for nourishment. So they thought of a different plan. Zeus took every sphere, cut it in half, where our front sides are at now, and had Apollo sew all of that loose skin to form what we have now as the belly button. Okay, this is what the CDC has been hiding from you this whole time. And after that, Apollo grabs our heads, turns it around to our front side, so that we will always constantly stare at this wound as a reminder of our transgression. Okay, so in this fallen state, not only are we not self-sufficient anymore, we're literally ass backwards. Okay, and it's only in this ass backward state did love emerge, because we desperately searched for another half that would make us whole. When they died, we'd go out looking for another one. Okay, and once we found someone, all we would do is to embrace a hug in an attempt to make ourselves whole, to restore the original state. But there was a problem. Okay, our genitals are still sticking out of our asses. So there was no sex, there was no consummation, there was no release, there was no reproduction. You just hugged the whole time, and you did nothing else. And the human race started dying out. The gods saw this, the gods took pity, give us one last divine gift to get to our current stage, post-nut clarity. Okay? The gods brought our genitalia from the back to the front, invented sexual reproduction, and through that, killed two birds with one stone. For us, it gave us post-nut clarity. It gave us release, and so we could actually get along with our lives. But for the gods, sexual reproduction ensured the perpetuation of the human race and their continued worship and therefore nourishment. Okay, so that is the story of how love and how humanity came to be. And I quote to you Aristophanes. Love's role is to restore us to our ancient state by trying to make unity out of duality and to heal our human condition. For each of us is a mere tally of a person, one of two sides of a filleted fish, one half of an original whole. We are all continually searching for our other half. Right. So that's the myth about the origin of love. And now we're going to examine the deeper philosophy, okay, behind this myth. And I hope you can already see why I describe this as modern. Okay, because for starters, the telos of love is painted as a union to combine two flesh into one. That was not the dominant mores at the time. The dominant aristocratic mores at the time was wives are for kids, concubines are for service, prostitutes are for pleasure. And against that backdrop, what Aristophanes is proposing is positively revolutionary, right? Not just in the monogamous aspect of it, but the fact that the union, in some sense, is more real than the individual. And what I mean by this is by depicting real man, spherical man, true man, as the spherical pair, right? As the pair. What Aristophanes is saying is that the couple is more real, more powerful, and more human than the individual can ever be. And that's quite unintuitive, right? Because it means that the romantic couple, unlike the pair of friends, is not just a relationship among entities. It itself is an entity that is more real than the individuals. What Aristophanes is getting at here is how, in romance, we tend to form a new identity, a we that we identify with, even more strongly than the I, right? And this is why I think romantic breakups hurt a lot more than when friends don't talk to each other. Because that we that you identify with literally dies when you break up. And the very fact that we use the word breakup, I think, owes a kind of debt to Aristophanes. Because breakup implies that we thought about the union as one being split together, right? In contrast, for example, in Chinese, breakup is 分手, the parting of hands, which implies that it was always two separate. There was a relation between them that didn't exist, but there was no union to begin with, right? This is, of course, why you should never date a Chinese person. Now, this idea of union being constitutive to love, right? Two flesh joined into one, of course, is not just an Aristophanic ideal, but it's a heavily Christian idea as well. Genesis 2, 22 to 24. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. What I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to bring in a tradition that you're all probably a lot more familiar with, right? The Christian tradition, to tease out specific insights about the Aristophanes ideal. And the first thing I want to tease out is a similarity between the two, which is that this idea of union is predicated on an original state of man that was one originally, right? In Aristophanes, it was a spherical pair. In the Christianity, it's the fact that Eve came out of Adam. But there's also a radical break between the two traditions. Because, well, for the Catholics at least, marriage is not just unitive, right? It's not just about forming intimate bonds with your lover. It's also procreative. The telos of sex, of love, of marriage is the production of new life, which is why to this day contraception is still banned by the Catholic Church. For Aristophanes, on the other hand, the purpose of love is just unitive, right? When the pairs go out searching for the other pair, they don't have in mind perpetuation of the race. They have in mind making themselves whole, right? In fact, if you recall, pregnancy is something the gods add as the last step for their sake, right? So that they can continue receiving nourishing worship. Kids are an unintended consequence for the union of the Aristophanic couple. And I think this is quite a modern idea as well, right? That the point of love is not about the children, it's about the parents. Instead of seeing bringing in new life as constitutive, as a telos, as the final fruit of love, the perennial worry now is that, children will make the love of the parents fizzle out, right? Here's a way to think about this. How many modern movies can you think about that have it as a core romantic plot point, a desire for the couple to have kids? More often than not, right? Kids are the comic impediments to the parents' love, right? And I think this is a Copernican shift in thinking that is at least partially responsible for the cratering birth rates we're seeing in modernity. Now, there's another feature of Aristophanic love that is thoroughly modern, which is that not only is union the singular telos of love, but love is the singular telos of life. And therefore, finding your soulmate, finding the one, your other half, is literally the end-all be-all of life. And if you want to see this depicted in a modern film, think about the line that bookends the Moulin Rouge, right? The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. Modern romance paints love as a search problem. You find your other half, and that's good. That's fine. End of story, happily ever after, the end. Because the assumption is they can satisfy everything. Modern romance never asks, okay, how is the washed-up courtesan and the starving artist going to sustain themselves? Okay, how is the low-class Jack going to mesh with the high-class Rose's social circles off the boat? How is Romeo and Juliet's marriage going to work when their families are trying to kill each other the whole time? Okay? It doesn't ask these questions because the assumption is that union will grant lovers literally everything. Okay? And so that's where the tension is at. And this, of course, is the philosophy of the Aristophanic lover, right? Who will literally embrace each other until starvation. Quote to you, Aristophanes. Love is the most benevolent of gods. This is how high he elevates love. Of gods to humankind, our helper and the healer of those ills, whose cure would bring the greatest happiness to the human race. This makes Aristophanic love both very stable, but extremely closed off, right? Even kids are outside of this bubble. Why? Because the lover can provide you with everything. You just need the lover and boom, you're back to, or you approximate Spherical Man. Love is a literal God, okay? That can grant us full existential fulfillment. That's what this myth is trying to tell us. The final feature of Aristophanic love, that's also quite modern, is that it is primarily physical. Okay, let me be clear. Aristophanes says as much. It's not just about sex. You can't explain such a strong yearning just with sex. But sex and physical union is constitutive to what the Aristophanic lover is seeking, right? To be welded together, if possible. All right, to summarize, these are the three key features of Aristophanic love And my argument is also modern love. Love is primarily unitive, not procreative. This union is the purpose of life. And this union is primarily physical. And Socrates' speech is going to attack all three assumptions. Okay? So we're moving on from the first speech we're examining, Aristophanes, to the second speech, Socrates' speech. And what Socrates is going to do is that he's going to relay a dialogue that he had with a temple prophetess called Diotima. So this is a young Socrates getting lectured by a wise prophetess. And this speech starts off by going directly at the Aristophanic claim that love is a god and the end-all be-all of life. And the refutation goes as such. Love is a yearning. Okay, it's a very strong yearning. You only yearn when you lack, right? And this idea was already in Aristophanes. Perfect spherical man, no yearning, no lack, no love. Ass backward state, lack, love. But if love implies a lack, okay, how can it be the telos of life? Why would the end goal of life to end up in a state of lack? And if love is a lack, how can love be a god? What kind of god would be lacking? Love, therefore, this is the intermediary conclusion, cannot be good or beautiful. Otherwise, he would have no use to yearn for and chase after goodness and beauty. But this doesn't mean that love is ugly and bad, because there exists an intermediary stage between the two, goodness and beauty, ugliness and badness. And we are told how this mechanism works through an analogy. Okay? So take knowledge. You can be wise, you can be ignorant, but there's a third stage, the middle stage, and that's a philosopher, right? A lover of wisdom. A philosopher is not yet wise. This is what people, this is the common misunderstanding. Philosophers are not yet wise. Otherwise, they wouldn't love wisdom. They would just have wisdom. They would just be wise. But a philosopher is also not ignorant, because the ignorant are ignorant of their ignorance, whereas the philosopher is aware. So like the philosopher, the lover also exists in this kind of middling stage, where he recognizes his own lack, but is on his way to pursue goodness and beauty. Plato goes one step even stronger here. The lover is not just like a philosopher. The lover is a philosopher. Okay? I quote you Plato. Wisdom is a most beautiful thing, and love is the love of the beautiful. So love must be a philosopher. And a philosopher is in a middle state between a wise man and an ignorant one. Okay, so this is how this argument works. Wisdom is beautiful. Lovers love beautiful things. Therefore, lovers love wisdom. What do we call a lover of wisdom? A philosopher. Lovers are philosophers. This is why, by the way, Socrates meant it when he said, love is the only thing I can claim to know about. Because he's a philosopher, and the only thing he knows about is love, is this intermediary stage, this stage of pursuit. Love, then, is not a god to be worshipped, but merely a great spirit, something in between humans and the divine. It is a mediator, right? A ferryman that connects these two realms. So it's a middling state, not the best state. Okay, I know what you're thinking, which is, all right, Jonathan, this is all very poetic. Okay, what does that have to do with me? All right, you're lecturing to Americans. They want to know how to use these ideas. All right, don't shoot. I'll give you what you want. There's quite a practical message here, which is that we are over-fetishizing love. Modern culture loves love, right? We think it's this highest state to be in. When our friends fall in love, we're so happy for them. But once you put it in Diotima's terms, loving love is loving lack, okay? It's wishing your friend to exist in a state of lack. So what Socrates is telling us is to not confuse the means for the ends. It's to not confuse the finger pointing at the moon with the moon itself. The correct response is not idolatry, to turn love into a god, as modern culture does, especially the French, I would say. It's to follow where love is leading us, right? It's to figure out how to actually satisfy this yearning. So that's the next question. What do we truly yearn for when we yearn in love? Aristophanes' answer, our answer, is union, right? We want to find the other half who makes us whole. Diotima again directly goes after this claim. I quote, "Love is not directed towards a half or a whole either, unless that half or whole is actually something good. Since people are quite prepared to have their own hands or feet amputated if they believe that these parts of themselves are diseased." Diotima's point is this: joined to what exactly? Okay, you spent this entire time, Aristophanes, talking about being joined to your other half, making yourself whole. No time talking about who it's actually worth being joined and welded to. And so the thought experiment is supposed to show that if you're forced to choose between wholeness, the integrity of your body, or goodness, keeping on a diseased limb, you gladly choose goodness over wholeness. Okay, and again, there's quite a practical piece of advice here, which is some people, women especially, as they get to a certain age, they feel like they need to get married. Okay, it's 11:59 on New Year's Eve party, so you're just grabbing whoever's closest to you to kiss. And Diotima would say, such a person fundamentally misunderstands the priority of what love is calling her to do, right? Love aims not primarily at union, but at the beautiful and the good. All right, next question. Why do we want the beautiful and the good? And Diotima's answer is quite simple. We believe possessing the good and the beautiful is going to make us happy. So it turns out our intense yearning in love is not a desire for union per se, but a desire to achieve happiness through the erotic domain. In other words, Aristophanes did not nearly go far enough, okay, because he foolishly believed that physical union is the end-all be-all of love, but its true purpose is nothing short of full happiness. And Diotima wants to ask us, do we really think physical union with an individual can grant us that kind of happiness we seek, right? To expect your romantic relationship to be the full existential justification of your life is putting upon it a weight that it cannot sustain. For Aristophanes, your lover is your salvation, okay? They have the power to make you whole. For Plato, the lover is simply an inspiration for you to seek your own salvation. Your lover is not divinity themselves, but they are an instantiation of the divine that helps you as a memory tool to direct your gaze upwards. Here's the argument so far, taking a step back. Love is not the best state, it's a middling state. What we want in love is not union, but happiness. Okay, obvious question, how do we achieve this happiness? And Diotima has already given us a clue. We want the good and the beautiful, to possess the good and the beautiful. But she adds, we need to possess it forever, for eternally. And the idea is, if we really want money and we make some money, but then we lose all that money, we're going to yearn for it again. So in order to keep being happy, we need to possess the good and the beautiful eternally, immortally. Okay? There's a very obvious problem. We're mortals. We die. But there's an even bigger problem before that, which is every day, we as individuals change. Atoms are flying in and out, cells are growing and dying. Our knowledge, even the things we know in our head, fades away, right? Memory fails us. So how do we as mortals approximate immortal possession? That's the question. I quote, "The object of love, Socrates," Diotima said, "is not as you think, simply the beautiful. What then? It is procreating and giving birth in the beautiful." The answer is procreation, okay? Which means babies, sure, but not just that. Because every day when you are renewing your habits, your commitments, your body, you are procreating. And those productive acts is how we as mortals, to continually produce, is how we as mortals approximate immortality. This is a massive inversion of Aristophanes, right? Because love is not a search problem. You find your other half, you embrace hunky-dory. Finding your lover is not where love ends for Plato. It's where love begins. What you create together, that's what matters. And there are better and worse things to procreate in, according to Diotima. Some people, Diotima tells us, are pregnant in body only, like animals. So they just have sex and they make babies. But others are also pregnant in their soul. And it's this soul pregnancy that is seen as the highest ideal. And what she means by soul pregnancy, the examples she gives are procreating in virtue. Okay, this is the couple making each other more virtuous. Procreating in art, inspiring each other great poems. Procreating in statecraft, founding and running of institutions and states. Here's the interesting thing. Diotima claims that couples who procreate in the soul, compared to those who only procreate with their body, not only have better offspring, better meaning more beautiful, more immortal, because that's what we're after, right? Immortal possession of the beautiful. But because of the better offspring, they have a closer union. They are more intimately intertwined. Again, massive inversion from Aristophanes, right? In Aristophanes, union is primary, procreation is unintended consequences. For Plato, not only is procreation primary, but how good your union is actually, it turns out, it's largely dependent on how good you procreate. But if that's the standard, right, that we're going to start judging who's a good lover, who's a bad lover, then it turns out the philosopher is not just like a lover. The philosopher is not just a lover. The philosopher is the best lover. Okay? Because for starters, unlike many lovers who have no idea what they want, the philosopher knows what he wants, happiness. He also knows how to get there, wisdom. But more importantly, as it relates to the standard, the philosopher is in communion, or the closest to, the most beautiful and the most immortal things in Plato's metaphysics, which are the forms, right? And very simply, you can think about these as like eternal ideas, like the idealized mathematical ratios. And so if you procreate with a philosopher, you will create the best offspring and therefore the best union, right? So despite what my ex may try to tell you, philosophers are indeed the best lovers. All right. So that's what Diotima thinks we're actually yearning for in love, right? To procreate the most beautiful and the most immortal of offspring. Next obvious question, how the hell do we do that? And the answer is to be found in the most famous image in all the Symposium, Diotima's ladder. Okay, this is a series of developmental steps that are supposed to take you from zero to hero, from like an animal, essentially, all the way to a philosopher. So we've covered what Diotima thinks we are actually wanting in love. Now we're going to move on to talk about how we achieve that, right? And that's Diotima's ladder. And this is our starting point. This is our first rung of the ladder. So the ladder is a series of rungs. You climb higher and higher. I quote, "He should fall in love with the body of one individual only, and there procreate beautiful discourse." All right, easy enough. You fall in love with one person, and even easier, you fall in love with their body. And keep in mind, this is the point where Aristophanes thought that love ends, right? But this is the starting point. This is the lowest rung of Diotima's ladder. But unlike in Aristophanes, there's no sex, right? You procreate, even when you love one body, no sex. You procreate in beautiful discourse, meaning dialectic, meaning philosophy, poetry, but no sex. And we're going to talk about why later on. This is the second rung of the ladder. He will realize for himself that the beauty of any one body is closely akin to that of any other body, and that if what is beautiful in form is to be pursued, it is folly not to regard the beauty in all bodies as one and the same. When he has understood this, he should slacken his intense passion for one body, looking down upon it and considering it a small thing, and become a lover of all bodies. Okay? So what motivates the climb is that each rung in the ladder, the higher rung, is more beautiful than the lower rung because it's more pure and less blemished, it's more theoretical, or it encompasses a more wide array of beauty. The higher rung is also more immortal. The beauty lasts longer than the lower rung. And finally, the higher rung's beauty explains why the lower rung is beautiful. Okay? So the first rung, you're liking one body. And if you want to climb higher, you're supposed to ask yourself, what's even better than this? What is more beautiful? What beauty lasts longer? What explains the beauty of one body? And the answer to all three is all bodies and the attractive features shared by them. Okay? This is not to make you despise that one body, but to make you realize that the beauty of a single body is not the end-all be-all, right? This doesn't mean you should just break up with your lover and just chase whoever is hot that you see. But it is to recognize that this Aristophanic belief in the one, right, is delusional. There's many fishes in the sea. No single external person holds the key to your happiness. Third rung, that's the second rung. Third rung is to move from bodies to souls. I quote you again. After this, he will realize that the beauty in souls is more to be prized than that in the body. If therefore someone's soul is good, even if his physical attraction is slight, that will be enough for him, and he will love and care for that person. So again, lover asks himself, what's even better than all bodies? What beauty lasts longer than bodily beauty? What explains bodily beauty? And the answer is soul beauty. Soul beauty is more beautiful than bodily beauty. Soul beauty obviously lasts longer than bodily beauty. But the third one is a bit curious, right? How does soul beauty explain bodily beauty? How does it cause bodily beauty? It's even more challenging because two of the protagonists, Socrates, famously beautiful soul, famously ugly body. Alcibiades, famously beautiful body, famously ugly soul. Okay, so the best thing I can come up with is this, and I've certainly noticed in myself as I've gotten more mature, which is, I don't know why you're laughing, but thank you, which is the nature of a person's characters actually changes a great deal about how physically you find them attractive, okay? So if someone has a really good character, you might even think that their body, not their soul, that their body is even more beautiful. And the inverse is clearly true, right? Some people are just so annoying, okay? It does not matter how hot they are. All right, again, the lover asks himself, what is more beautiful than souls? What lasts longer than soul beauty? What explains soul beauty? So the fourth rung is human practices and laws, okay? This is what societies are made of. The rituals, the language, the dances, the laws, the practices, everything that makes up a society that is needed to cultivate a beautiful soul. These practices and laws, they outlast any soul, and they are more beautiful because they're more abstract, they're less blemished, and they encompass more diverse forms of beauty. Okay, you guys know the drill now. That the lover asks himself, what's even more beautiful? What lasts even longer? What explains this beauty? And so the last two rungs of the ladder are further moves into abstraction. The fifth rung is knowledge, okay, the object of science. The sixth rung is the form of beauty itself. Okay, this is the precise mathematical ratio. Put it very simply, this is the eternal idea of beauty itself, which of course is the object of philosophy. Okay. Both these moves to further abstraction explain the lower rungs. They get at more fundamental, more lasting forms of beauty, and they are more beautiful because they are even less blemished, right? And if you're struggling to understand, what does Socrates mean? What does Diotima mean when she calls science or philosophy beautiful? Think about a mathematician or a physicist who calls their equation beautiful, like E equals mc squared. Its beauty lies in its elegance, okay? The fact that it is completely unblemished, that any material faults you might find in the world is not there in E equals mc squared. And yet it encapsulates so much about so much, right? So we started off with a love for one body, and we ended up in the study of philosophy. I know what you're thinking. Nice try, Socrates. Good try, trying to trick me to do philosophy, okay? I just want to get laid, okay? I came to your party because I wanted to get some action. I heard there's going to be this cute flute girl and a lot of alcohol. I get to your party. You shoo the flute girl away. You lecture me all night about philosophy. It's 6 a.m., I'm hungover, I have zero action, and I'm outside of your door with the form of beauty. What am I supposed to do with that, right? This is a clear bait and switch. To which I will reassure the disgruntled attendee that there is no bait and switch, okay? Because you came here loving beauty, and we did not smuggle in any other goals We didn't smuggle in contemplation or wisdom. We simply met you where you're at. You like one body, that's great. And all we did is to give you more beautiful things. All we did climbing this ladder is to say, what's more beautiful, what beauty lasts longer, and what explains this beauty. So there's no sleight of hand, okay? Because we got here only by following the trail of beauty upwards, nothing else. And frankly, I deeply relate to this progression, Diotima's ladder. And part of the reason why I'm devoting so much of my time to study philosophy is because I think it's the most beautiful subject. It gets at the most fundamental, most eternal, most all-encompassing truths in the most pure and the least blemished of ways. Okay. Now, if you're still unconvinced, consider that you're being led on Diotima's ladder right now in this lecture. Diotima's ladder is a huge inspiration for how I structure all of my lectures and how I balance the needs between accessibility and profundity. Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys in on a little secret. I'm gonna title this lecture, on the thumbnail, social media, something completely ridiculous. Okay, Plato's one weird trick for love. Dating coaches hate him. That's what people want to click on. And remember, that's what people want to learn. And remember, in the introduction, what I told you, this book is going to fix your dating life. That's not what the Symposium is about, okay? I mean, you are going to learn that. And it's not what it's not about, but it's about so much more, okay? In the same way that a singular body is beautiful, but there's a lot more to beauty. Now think about what would happen if I just started the lecture with, you know what's cooler than sex? Philosophy. You'd run away, right? You wouldn't watch this thing. You wouldn't stay here. So it's only after an hour that I showed you how your practical interests relate to your relationship with beauty, relate to Aristophanes' philosophy, relates to Diotima's rejection of that philosophy, relates to philosophy itself, that we can start to begin to talk about what this book is actually about, which is the proper ordering of one's love in one's soul, the proper ordering of one's desire in one's soul. And keep in mind, we still got half a lecture to climb, okay? So there's gonna be even more crazy shit that if I told you now, you'd also run away screaming now. So Diotima's ladder is not a bait and switch, it's not a sleight of hand. It's about meeting people where they're at. It's about showing how their current desires are actually best satisfied by things that they haven't even learned to desire yet. So we talked about what we want in love. Okay, love is not the purpose of life, it's a middling state. Love is not about union, it's about procreation. And the highest form of procreation is not physical, but it's spiritual. We've also covered how best to achieve what we actually want out of love, right? Which is Diotima's ladder. And now I want to discuss a few of the most common critiques of this ladder to better help us understand what is really at stake with what Plato is getting at. The first critique is that how is this still love? Okay, how is this still erotic, romantic at all? Like, you're not having any sex, and you're doing philosophy the whole time. No wonder platonic relationships have literally come to mean non-romantic relationships, right? What you have to understand is that Diotima's ladder and the Symposium writ large is about the ordering of one's loves in a single soul. And if you want to understand what a platonic romance between two souls look like, you have to go into other parts of Plato, including, as I described before, the Phaedrus. So it turns out these platonic relationships are actually quite romantic, and they're governed by recognition, okay? 3 specific species of romantic recognition. The first species, quite obvious, is that we want to impress our lovers, okay? We want to impress the other sex. And Plato's getting at, if we're really being honest with what motivates us, we'll see just how much of our lives are motivated working out, making a lot of money, career jump, getting a fancy title, by impressing the other sex. That sounds like a bad thing. But the idea here is that if you're trying to impress a beautiful soul, someone who has the right set of values, then you're just doing the right thing. This is how strong Plato thinks that this drive is. I quote to you a famous passage that he puts in the mouth of one of the Symposius. If only some means might be found for a state or an army to consist of pairs of lovers, there would be no better people to run their country, for they would avoid any act that brought disgrace and would compete with each other in winning honor. Moreover, they would be victorious over virtually every other army, even if they were only few in number, as long as they fought side by side. Certainly, a man in love who deserted his post or threw away his arms would mind less being seen by the whole world than by his beloved. Sooner than this, he would choose to die 1,000 deaths. That's the first species. We want to impress the lover. The second species is a kind of self-recognition that we win in romance, okay? And the best way we can tease it out is by a single utterance that Socrates makes to his particularly beautiful companion. Phaedrus, if I didn't know you, I must have forgotten myself too. Okay. This is the awe that I began the lecture with. True beauty is a memory aid. Okay. It's a reminder of what is possible for us to truly become. And this kind of recognition is motivational, not because you want to impress an external standard, but because your own internal standards have been elevated through your brush with beauty, right? There's a Chinese saying, 情人眼里出西施. The eyes of the lover make of the beloved an Aphrodite. And it's an attempt at capturing how lovers tend to see the best qualities in their beloved, and probably even exaggerate it until it seems divine. Plato's response is that divinity you see, that's real. Not as actuality, but as potentiality. And so, Plato thinks, this newfound memory is going to motivate the lover not just to improve himself, but also do everything he can to help his beloved. Plato says that to honor his beloved, the lover will do anything in his means to fashion his beloved into a literal god, right? The same god that he sees the beloved as already being, a Hera, a Zeus, and Apollo. Third species of recognition is simply how the beloved reacts to the lover. Quote to you, Plato. Just as a gust of wind or an echo rebounds from smooth, hard objects and returns to where it came from, so the flow of beauty returns into the beloved's through his eyes, which is its natural route into the soul, and fills the soul of the beloved in his turn with love. He is seeing himself in his lover as in a mirror. He has contracted counter-love as a reflection of the lover's love. When you find a lover who not only sees in you the best qualities, but does everything he can to try to help you get even better, what Plato's getting at here is that that's not just motivational, but that can transform fundamentally how you see yourself, right? I think it's analogous to when we were kids and we want to, let's say, improve upon a skill. Okay, let's say we want to be good at arts or crafts or singing, but we're not confident until we find an older sibling, a parent, a teacher who makes us confident by lending us their confidence in us. Okay, what they're saying is, if you don't yet believe in yourself, believe in my belief in you. And this can be even stronger in the romantic domain. Why? Because the eyes of the lover make of the beloved an Aphrodite, right? And suddenly, that divine image you see in your lover's eyes becomes a mirror through which you understand now your own potential, okay? And so, what Plato is getting at is that the mirror of romance can, the key word, can, show us our true potential even more clearly than we can ever hope to discern ourselves. And once you realize that this ladder is not necessarily scaled alone, but can be scaled romantically through these forces with a lover, suddenly platonic relationships don't seem that platonic anymore. Just to be clear here, your lover's beauty is not the greatest beauty in the world, not even close, but is a local and constant reminder and instantiation of the greater beauties that you'll pursue together, right? Now, you might be a bit concerned hearing these three kinds of motivations. First one sounds like you're a slave to someone's opinion. Second one sounds like a fantasist, right? I want to turn you into something you're not. I want to deify you, make you into a god. Third one sounds like a narcissist. I'm in love with you because I like the divine reflection of myself in your eyes. These, I think, are all valid concerns, potentially even likely modes that Platonic love goes wrong. And the only guard against this is why you have to do it with a beautiful soul, right? And this is why it's very, very, very rare. If you do this with an ugly soul, someone with bad values, impressing them will lead you to vice and not virtue. If you do it with a beautiful soul, someone with the right values, that's just doing the right thing. This is also why what your lover likes about you matters so much. If it's your career, if it's your bank account, if it's your soul, it's your character, it's your looks, whatever those qualities are, is going to be the mirror through which you start understanding yourself and reshape your own priorities. This is how much is at stake. What Plato is getting at here is that the choice of a lover is not just who do I spend the rest of my time with. It's picking a new self, okay? Because it's picking a mirror through which you will see yourself constantly reflected through every single day. That's how much is at stake. That's the first objection, right? Not romantic enough. I don't think that's fair. Second objection is a lot more difficult to dismiss. It's that the individual herself is never loved in Platonic love. Okay, so here's the concern. We are humans, and even the best humans, they have good qualities. They have a lot of bad qualities as well. But we want every part of ourselves to be loved, not just the good qualities, also our quirks, and if we're being honest, probably our shortcomings as well. And yet in Platonic love, the individual in her whole is never the object of love. And there's no real response to the second objection than to just bite the bullet, okay? Because that's an accurate description of what Platonic love is. If you want, I love you just the way you are, you're knocking on the wrong door. That's Aristophanes. Plato is more like, I love you for X, Y, Z good qualities, and I will do my best to both help you and me, but it's a deeply unsettling process. Aristophanic love is unconditional. It's the end of the journey. It's a stabilizing force. Platonic love is conditional. It's the beginning of a journey. And it's a deeply destabilizing force, right? It's unsettling. And it can create in you aspirations that you may not even be ready for. And we're going to see how that pans out with Alcibiades. But let me give you a more practical and relatable example. I was watching this vlog by this model with the title, Watch This Before You Date a High-Value Man. And it was her complaining how the expectations of a high-value man get imbued on her as unwelcome pressure, okay? And so whether you interpret the kind of expectations of the Platonic lover as welcomed motivation or unwelcome pressure is going to tell you a lot about whether you're ready to do something like this. So remember, the previous point I made was that you better make sure you find the right person to do this with. It turns out you also need to make sure that you are the right person to do this, right? That you are also ready. Personally, for the longest time, I've been resistant to dating, marriage, because I've thought about it like a kind of settling down. But I didn't want to settle down. Right? I want to keep growing, I want to keep changing. And if Plato's convinced me of anything, it's that finding the right person can accelerate your trajectory so fast that you might not even be ready for it, okay? And I just want to emphasize, for Plato, finding a Platonic lover is a cherry on top, but it's not needed, because the purpose of life is not wholeness, it's goodness, which means that if you find someone to do this with, and if you're ready, bloody good fortune, good for you. You're going to have an amazing time. You're going to develop yourselves. Your souls are literally going to grow wings together. That's the imagery that Plato uses. But union is not the point. It's also not necessary. You don't have to have a girlfriend to be a philosopher, okay? Phew, thank God. Diotima's ladder is best scaled with a lover. You can just also do it yourself, okay? So just kind of like sex. In fact, I'm going to share with you an incredible story, like literally, you should probably not believe it, about Socrates. Allegedly, Socrates and the point of the story is to show you how little union matters in Platonic love. Allegedly, Socrates found literally the most annoying woman he could find to marry to test his own resolve, okay? How annoying was she? Her name has literally come to mean nagging woman, xanthopy, okay? When you call someone a xanthopy, you're saying that's a naggy woman. And if this story is true, think about what it tells us about Socrates' priorities. It's not finding his soulmate, right? It's not joining himself to the perfect partner that will make him whole. It's procreation, making a shit ton of kids, which they did, and procreating in virtue, right? A testing bed for his own virtue, and maybe someone who he can help make more virtuous as well. And so because union is not the point of Platonic love, it is compatible with a whole range of different kinds of sexual practices. In the laws, it's monogamy that's prescribed. In the Republic, the guardian classes share wives and husbands. Okay, it's like a romantic communism. And then Socrates, well, I'm getting a lot of laughs today, that's great. Socrates, even with a wife, is seen chasing beautiful youth around Athens, okay? The reason, again, that union doesn't really matter is that there's no original state of man where two was one. There's no Aristophanic spherical man, no Eve that comes out of Adam. The Platonic soul is an individual, and it reincarnates as such. All right, there's one last objection, which I know you're all thinking about, which is where's the sex? Okay, why can't we have sex? Why, even in the first rung of the ladder, are the Platonic lovers not allowed to have sex? It turns out that this is quite a consistent picture, okay, across Plato, across the dialogues, which is that the best lovers only lust after each other's souls. No non-procreative sex. If you're gonna have sex, it's only for the explicit goal of making children. The worst lovers only lust after each other's bodies. Okay, they're having a lot of non-procreative sex. The middling lovers lust after each other's souls and their bodies. They occasionally have non-procreative sex only when they fail to control themselves. That's quite weird, okay, for the modern mind. I'm sure we can all agree why the best lover is better than the worst lover, right? If you have to choose between soul and bodily love, you choose soul love. But why is enjoying each other's soul and bodies worse than just soul love? And the answer, very simply, is that non-procreative sex is unnecessary. You can train yourself out of it. There's little benefit other than pleasure. And most importantly, it's untamable, okay? Sex is just too pleasurable, and it will be distracting from your joint ascend upwards. You can't be a moderate sex haver in the way that you can be a moderate drinker, right? You can drink wine moderately. And this is why even committed couples are advised against non-procreative sex. The procreative sex, on the other hand, is just as pleasurable, or so I've been told. But there's immense benefit, namely the production of children, and therefore it's also necessary. And that's why it's permitted, okay? But even when you have procreative sex, I think for Plato, it's analogous to an undercover cop who's taking a huge hit of heroin to not blow his teammate's cover, okay? So procreative sex, I think, is like taking one for the team in the Platonic worldview. You're exposing yourself to an exorbitant amount of pleasure, a potentially life-altering amount of pleasure for your duty as a citizen, right? And so even procreative sex, try not to enjoy it too much. And this, I think, is reflective of Plato's picture of the appetites writ large. Again, very loosely, very simply, appetitive pleasures, try to minimize them, right? Try to get them to subsistence. Because the more you feed the appetites, whether it's sex, gluttony, the more they will grow and the more they will become tyrannical. Appetites, this is the image that he uses, are like leaden weights that drag your ascent upwards, that prevent you from climbing higher. And this was not an uncommon view at the time. In fact, this is why, if you look at classical art, classical sculpture, the small flaccid penis is considered more desirable because it represents a man who has his appetites under control, and therefore he is moderate and a virtuous man. Okay? Now, I don't usually like to brag, especially about such crude matters. So I won't. Okay, but here's an objection to this view, right? What about intimacy? That's not a small benefit. That's a pretty big benefit between couples. The first response is that love is not about intimacy. Love is not about intimacy. It's not about union. It's about procreation. But even if love were about intimacy, it's still better not to have sex. Why? Because remember, better intimacy, better union in the Platonic worldview comes from better procreation. So whatever marginal intimacy you gain from having sex, you lose by not ascending higher on the ladder together and procreating in even better things, right? Now there's still a kind of physicality in Platonic love. You kiss, you touch, you lie together, roll on the ground. But what's important, okay, is that you keep the tension in the bow by not having sex, and you direct that upwards. And the most charitable way, okay, I can make sense of all of this, is that the lack of sex keeps the mystery alive. And it keeps you asking, this strong impulse that I feel, what is the true source of this beauty, right? Whereas once you start having sex, the question is answered, and you're stuck to the lowest rung. Because remember, in Aristophanes, once people started having sex, post-nut clarity, they became sober. But we don't want sobriety. We want to keep the divine madness alive, right? That is the fuel for climbing up the ladder. Now, if you think that this ideal, right, no non-procreative sex even within committed couples, is way too strict, even as an ideal, let me just remind you of two things. Number one, this is not that far off from the Catholic position today. Number two, sexual mores can change radically from culture to culture, where something that's unthinkable to us is second nature to someone else. And to prove this point, in the most striking way possible, I'm going to reveal to you something about the Phaedrus in the Symposium that I've strategically kept hidden this entire time, lest it be too distracting, okay? And I'm going to reveal this with a question. The protagonists of these plays mostly are grown men. Who do you think the object of their love is? It's not women. It's not men. It's young boys. In the beginning, the awe, it's a 40-year-old drooling over a 14-year-old. Okay, Socrates chasing beautiful youths, he's chasing young boys around town. Okay, the literal question that begins and motivates the Phaedrus is, how can I give a speech so good that I will convince an unwilling young boy to have sex with me? Okay. In almost every single instance, in these two greatest dialogues on love of Plato, it's all man-boy love. One of the exceptions is actually Aristophanes. Man-boy love is called pederasty, and it was an incredibly important aristocratic institution at the time. So much so, okay, that the legitimacy of man-boy love is never questioned in these two dialogues, even though man-boy sex is, but only because it's not procreative. Okay, in fact, the highest ideals in both these dialogues are framed in pederastic terms. Diotima describes her ladder thus: to ascend, I'm quoting, to ascend from the things of this world through loving boys in the right way. Okay, the question is never, should we, should we do this? What's the right way? What's the wrong way? Okay. And this is the highest achievement as described in the Phaedrus. A man who has practiced philosophy with sincerity, or combined his love for a boy with the practice of philosophy. Okay, obvious question is, why are these aristocrats into young boys? The overly simplified answer is that we talked about how the highest forms of love has to be soul love. Women weren't educated, except for courtesans. So they weren't proper recipients of soul love. But grown men weren't properly recipients of bodily love because it was seen as emasculating to be penetrated. So like via a process of elimination, young boys, right? Now, I bring this up as an example, not just to scar you for life and make you never want to touch Plato again, but as hopefully a very astonishing example, just how much sexual mores can change from culture to culture due to social historical circumstances. Okay. And Plato makes this point in his laws. Some barbarians have incest. We don't even have to stop having incest. Okay, it's just not an option. Like our siblings and our parents are just not an option for us. So Plato, I think, would want to ask us, if you think this ideal I just told you about non-procreative sex is too high, in the same way that we no longer like young boys or have incest, Plato thinks that there's a lot more flexibility than we think in terms of that we can further constrain the sexual drive down just to the non-procreative act. Okay. So these are Plato's views on love as he puts in the mouth of his Socrates. Ultimate goal of love is happiness. To be happy, we need to possess the good and the beautiful forever. The best way for mortals to approximate immortal possession is through procreation. There are higher and lower ways to procreate, sex being the lowest, philosophy being the highest. And indulging in the lower rungs, okay, will hinder your climb upwards. I bet most of you still are quite unconvinced, and that's fine, because Plato expects that, which is why he injects one last speech to end the Symposium, right after Socrates' speech. And that's the speech of the legendary Alcibiades. Okay, so we're now moving on from analysis of Socrates' speech to analysis of Alcibiades' speech. Alcibiades was not one of the original 6 symposiists. He crashes into the party, piss drunk. And he's desire incarnate. Okay, he's drunk out of his mind. He's got a crowd of revelers, he's got a flute girl beside him, and he's crowned with a garland of ivies and violets. This is not subtle, okay? Dionysus. Plato's painting this as Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy. And what he's trying to say is, anticipating our reluctance, if you don't follow my prescriptions, this is who you risk becoming, okay? So before we talk about Alcibiades, the content of his speech, I need to tell you about who Alcibiades was, because that's going to be very important to the point that Plato's trying to make. So at the time of the Symposium, Alcibiades was Athens' golden child, okay? His most striking feature was that he was incredibly beautiful. And in a society that idolized young male beauty, for reasons we already described, that made him incredibly popular. On top of that, he came from a noble aristocratic line. Pericles, the great orator and statesman, was his relative, became his guardian after his father passed away. On top of all that, he wasn't just some pretty rich boy. He had energy, charisma, and intellectual depth that made him not just one of the greatest orators to enchant Athens, but also one of her greatest generals in the Peloponnesian War. And on top of all that, as if all those gifts were not enough, he seemingly had a love for wisdom and philosophy. Alcibiades had the perfect nature, the most ideal nature. And yet we are told in the Republic how these natures tend to self-destruct. Quote to you, Plato. Quickness in learning, memory, courage, and magnificence are the traits of this philosophical nature. His kinsmen and fellow citizens will fawn upon him with petitions and honors, anticipating and flattering the power that will be his. How then do you think such a youth will behave in such conditions, especially if it happens that he belongs to a great city and is rich and well-born, handsome and tall? Will his soul not be filled with vaulting ambition? And even if we suppose that one such youth is moved and drawn towards philosophy, what do we suppose will be the conduct of those who think that they are losing his service and fellowship? The very qualities that make up the philosophical nature become, when the environment and nurture are bad, the cause of its undoing. Such is the destruction and corruption of the most excellent nature, which is rare enough. And it is from men of this type which springs those who do the greatest harm to communities and individuals, and the greatest good when the tide carries them in the other direction. Plato wrote this passage of the Republic, I think, perhaps, with Alcibiades in mind, right? Because what was his downfall was his enormous talent and the temptations that brought him. Alcibiades is like a spoiled, famous child actor, right? Who received way too many temptations, unlimited attention, pleasure, money, before he developed his own faculty of self-control. So what doomed him then, just like a spoiled child actor, were his unhinged appetites and his lust for the approval of the crowd. So right before what would have been Alcibiades' greatest military campaign, the Sicilian expedition, he was exiled because the night before, holy statues were mutilated and he was considered guilty because of his notoriety for being a wild partier. Where does he go? He goes to Sparta, the chief enemy, and helps them kill the Athenians. His appetites get the best of him again, seduces the Spartan king's wife. So he flees to Persia, the historical enemy of all the Greeks, and he advises the Persian ruler how to play his fellow Greeks off each other to increase Persia's power. Okay. This is the middle of the Peloponnesian War. Okay, it doesn't get more treacherous than this. The modern equivalent would be if Eisenhower, right before D-Day, left to the Nazi side with all the plans, helped the Nazis defeat the Allies, and then defected against the Soviet Union to plot for world domination. Okay, that's the modern equivalent. So what happens next is incredible. Athens calls him back, invites him back, and installs him as one of Athens' great military leaders again, which goes to show not just the desperation that the Athenians were in, but the sheer brilliance, how charming, how convincing, and how militarily needed Alcibiades was. So he leads the Athenian fleet against the Spartans, secures a string of decisive victories, and then eventually is blamed for one defeat, exiled for a second time, assassinated in exile. The story of Alcibiades is not just one of wasted potential, like meaning the good that should have been done that wasn't done. It was of active harm, right? And by the time the Symposium was written, there was no one in Athens that inspired as much envy and also admiration, anger, but also love, because Alcibiades was both the Athenian hero and the Athenian villain all packed into one. And so the Athenian citizenry were incredibly confused and demanded an explanation of what had happened. But of course, there was another very important reason why Plato depicts Alcibiades and Socrates interacting here. It's because Alcibiades was one of the key reasons that the Athenians decided to eventually kill Socrates. One of the charges against Socrates, corruption of the youth. And Alcibiades, who was thought to be his lover and his student, was one of the key targets of that alleged corruption, right? And so by depicting the interactions between Socrates and Alcibiades, this is not just a warning about the dangers of the appetite. It's Plato's attempt to acquit Socrates, to acquit philosophy herself from the charges of producing a traitor. Okay, so this is why Alcibiades' speech is so important, why so much is at stake, and what we're going to examine now. And the first thing I want to point out is that Alcibiades' speech is, again, very different from every other speech. Every other speech was abstract. It was a rational treatise. It was a myth. It was a dialogue with Diotima. It talked about love in the general. Whereas for Alcibiades' speech, he talks about his love for a specific person, Socrates, whom he is in love with. And against the backdrop of Diotima's ladder, Plato's trying to tell us something here. Alcibiades is stuck on the lowest rung, the one-body rung, right? Because of his appetites. Okay, and he begins his speech thus. Alcibiades speaking. My heart pounds and tears flow merely because of Socrates' words. When I used to listen to Pericles and other great orators, I naturally thought they spoke well, but I was never affected to anything like the same extent. My soul wasn't in turmoil, and I wasn't disturbed by the thought that I was a slave to my way of living. But after listening to this man, I thought my kind of life was not worth living. What I have felt in the presence of this one man is what no one would think I had it in me to feel in front of anyone. And that is shame. This is the downside of Platonic love that I was hinting at before. Alcibiades could feel Socrates grabbing him, trying to grab him by the collar, trying to make him a better person, but he's not ready, okay? And for someone who isn't ready, those expectations manifest as shame. And this threat is not just unique to Alcibiades, but for all of us. Because to open oneself up to the beauty of the beloved and the true potential of man is also at once to open ourselves up to our own ugliness, our own incompleteness, and how much higher we also have to climb. So this path is not for everyone, okay? In fact, it's not for most people, because Socratic love only avoids the kind of comforting laziness of Aristophanes, but at the great price of being constantly unsettled. Even Socrates is not wise yet. Even Socrates needs to still climb, right? And in Alcibiades, that unsettlement comes out as shame. But shame, I would argue, is a great achievement, okay? Because think about how a regular person would react to Socrates. They wouldn't even understand what he was saying. And if they did, they might just laugh him off. But shame here actually means that Alcibiades understood and agrees with Socrates and is a mark of his perfect nature, his philosophical potential. And that philosophical potential makes Alcibiades fall in love with Socrates. And so, again, he's pissed drunk at this point. He confesses to the Symposium how he's tried to manufacture all kinds of one-on-one situations, hoping Socrates would make the move. So they go to dinner together, they naked wrestle, but he just can't get, Socrates to make a move. Until one night, Socrates stays over at Alcibiades' house because dinner went very long, and they're sleeping in the same room. And the following happens. I quote to you, Alcibiades. After the lamp had been put out and the servants had left the room, I decided that I should no longer speak equivocally, but should say straight out what I was thinking. So I nudged him and said, Socrates, are you asleep? No, he replied. Do you know what I'm thinking? No, what? I think, I said, that you alone are a worthy lover for me, and that it is very foolish of me not to gratify you in this or in any other way in which you might need help from my resources or from my friends. For me, nothing is more important than to become as good a person as possible, and I think no one would be better fitted to assist me in this aim than you. And I, for my part, would feel more ashamed at what intelligent men would say if I did not gratify a man such as you, than at what the unintelligent public would say if I did gratify you. Think about how crazy this is. The most beautiful, the most famous, the most incredibly rich celebrity general aristocrat chasing this old, ugly, like we're told, like he doesn't wash himself, like unkempt guy, begging him not just for sex, but offering his entire wallet, access to an entire network. This again, I think, shows just how much philosophical potential Alcibiades has. Because despite his appetites, despite that he may be still stuck in the first rung, he's clearly attracted to Socrates' soul. There's nothing about the body that's attractive at all, right? Socrates' response to Alcibiades is hilarious. He turns around to this beauty laying right in front of him, and he says, you must see in me an irresistible beauty vastly superior to the physical attractions you possess. But if on this basis you are trying to strike a bargain with me and trade your beauty for mine, then your intention is to win a considerable advantage over me. What you are trying to acquire is true beauty in return for apparent beauty. In fact, you intend to get gold in exchange for bronze. What he's saying is, you want some of this for some of that? You're trying to pull a fast one on me. This is a terrible trade for me. We all know that, this beauty is better than that beauty. Okay? Socrates turns around, goes back to sleep. Nothing happens. Alcibiades is left dumbfounded. This never happened to him before. Okay? Socrates, of course, is toying with Alcibiades because you don't need to trade anything for Socrates to help you. He's not a sophist. He doesn't charge people to attend his lectures. You can just come for free. It's open to anyone. And furthermore, Socrates isn't chasing beautiful youths around town for their bodies or for their wallets, but to help their souls. The bigger issue, however, is that Alcibiades fails to realize Socrates can't help him in the same way that a lover can't make you whole. This is why Socrates says to him, "But look more carefully, dear boy, in case I am actually worthless and you have not noticed." Ultimately, you have to climb the ladder yourself. Your lover can inspire you, and Alcibiades is inspired by Socrates, but you are responsible for your happiness, your character, and your actions. Philosophy, then, is acquitted of her crimes. It was not responsible for corrupting Alcibiades. It was merely impotent in helping an already too corrupt Alcibiades. Alcibiades' failure, then, is one of excess and not deficiency. This man was not lacking in anything, right? And it was the fact that he wasn't able to contain his desires and his lust for recognition that ultimately caused his demise, and which, again, is why Plato advocates against tyrannical pleasures like sex. When Socrates was around Alcibiades, he could act as a moderating influence, okay? He could, maybe get him excited about philosophy again, but as soon as Socrates left, Alcibiades' appetites got the best hold of him, he degenerated, which ultimately led to his demise. Now, there's another way to look at Alcibiades' failures, and it might be a bit unintuitive at first, which is that he's actually trying to climb the ladder too fast, or he's trying to skip stages in the ladder. He wants to do philosophy, the highest rung, without even being able to do loving a single body, which includes, obviously, managing one's appetites for that single body. We are told time and time again in Plato, respect life's stages. No philosophy is a republic until you're 30. And now we're told why. Now we see why in the life of Alcibiades. Because if you don't know how to even properly love and manage your desires for one body, you're not going to have the consistency to do philosophy. Okay. Now, in another one of the dialogues, called the First Alcibiades, we're shown a young Alcibiades eagerly wanting to get into a politics to build a just state. That's the fourth rung, right? Human practices and laws. But it was clear he didn't master the third rung. He doesn't know what a just soul consists of. But if you don't have a positive vision of what makes a good soul, what makes someone happy, how are you supposed to discern, let alone build a society that produces these good souls, right? And Alcibiades is like a college activist who can't hold a part-time job, but thinks he can solve the Middle East, right? He's trying to skip these stages. And so the ladder of Diotima is not just a way to meet people where they're at, it's also a necessary curriculum that we all have to go through. So if you find yourself skipping stages in life, you're probably missing something massive, and you're probably not getting the current stage where you think you're getting at all. All right, that's Alcibiades' speech, and that concludes both the symposium and our lecture. And I've tried my best today to defend every aspect of Plato's conception of love, even if I'm privately still wrestling with them. Most notably, the lack of union in Platonic love, and of course, the admonition against non-procreative sex. Now, on one hand, I want to say, surely there's a way, okay, to integrate non-procreative sex into the good life, where it's where it's a bit more like wine drinking and a lot less like heroin. But on the other hand, there's a part of me, right? I think this is the part of me that's really attracted to the otherworldly aspects of religion, of Buddhism, of Christianity, that can't help but nod along. The good life, you can live a fine life if you are moderate with your appetites. But if you want the best states of existence, right? This is what a lot of the religious traditions tell us. You're going to have to be willing to tame, if not call, all of your appetites. Not unlike falling in love, then, Plato's Symposium has thoroughly unsettled me. And the only certainty I'm left with is two overwhelming responses. The first one is awe. An awe at the beauty of the Symposium itself, at how each of its lines, right, just like the cathedral, are also directing my gaze upwards. But the second response is a shame. Okay, a shame after following those lines up and seeing how far I have yet to climb. But unlike Alcibiades, my shame has one source of consolation, which is that I returned to the Symposium because I had a particularly intense romantic experience at the beginning of this year, where just like Plato said, beauty, not just in body, but in soul, led me aloft. And my first reaction to that magical experience was, oh my God, I gotta read Plato again. He was just telling me about this, which I suppose isn't the most romantic of responses, but it is my first steps on Diotima's ladder, traversing from the particular to the universal. And so while I am not yet, clearly, happy nor wise, I take great consolation in the fact that I've shown myself to be a philosopher, and therefore the greatest of all lovers. Thank you. Thanks for watching my lecture. If you want to go even deeper into these ideas, then go join my email list at jonathanb.com. You'll not only get full-length episodes, but also transcripts, book notes, and invitations to future lectures. If you like this lecture, then go check out my interview with David O'Connor, where we apply Plato's insights in this book to understand modern dating, OnlyFans, the incel phenomenon, and what to do about it. You can find links to that interview and everything we covered today in the description, as well as on my website, jonathanb.com. Thank you.